The distress call came through at 03:47 hours on a moonless night in the Persian Gulf, and within minutes, every command center from Bahrain to the Pentagon went into lockdown. A U.S. Marine reconnaissance unit, 12 men operating under the cover of darkness, had been cornered on Abu Musa Island, that jagged piece of Iranian territory sitting like a dagger pointed at the shipping lanes that carry a quarter of the world's oil. The transmission was fragmentary, laced with static and the unmistakable crack of small arms fire. Multiple hostiles, "We are pinned, request immediate extract," then nothing but the hiss of dead air. Abu Musa had always been a powder keg, a contested rock claimed by Iran but disputed by the United Arab Emirates, strategically positioned to control the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz. Intelligence suggested the Iranians had been fortifying positions there for months, installing radar systems and anti-ship batteries that could threaten any vessel attempting passage. The Marines had gone in to verify these installations, a routine surveillance operation that should have been textbook. But someone had been waiting. Someone had known they were coming. And now, 12 of America's finest were fighting for their lives on hostile ground, while Iranian Revolutionary Guard boats circled the waters like sharks sensing blood. The Situation Room erupted into controlled chaos. Field commanders barked orders, satellite feeds streamed live imagery of the island's rocky terrain, and analysts scrambled to determine how a covert operation had been so thoroughly compromised. The Marines were professional, elite operators who could disappear into terrain that offered barely enough cover for a scorpion, yet somehow they'd walked straight into a perfectly laid ambush. Iranian forces had positioned themselves with remarkable precision, blocking every viable extraction point, every beach that could accommodate a rescue helicopter, every inlet where fast boats might slip through undetected. Time became the enemy. Every passing minute meant the Marines' defensive perimeter grew weaker, ammunition ran lower, and the probability of casualties climbed exponentially. The Iranian forces weren't just holding position, they were advancing, methodically tightening the noose with the patience of hunters who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Intercepts picked up Farsi communications, coordinating movements, calling in reinforcements from the mainland barely 12 miles away. This wasn't a chance encounter or a border skirmish that had spiraled out of control. This was deliberate, orchestrated, a message written in gunfire and geography. The Pentagon faced an impossible equation. A direct rescue mission would require helicopters flying into a hot landing zone under fire from prepared positions, likely resulting in catastrophic losses. The Iranians had positioned anti-aircraft weapons precisely where they would do maximum damage to any airborne approach. Naval assets in the region, destroyers, cruisers, the carrier strike group operating in the Gulf of Oman, were hours from optimal position. Diplomatic channels, already strained to breaking point, offered no quick solution. Tehran would deny everything, or claim the Marines were illegal infiltrators in Iranian sovereign territory, spinning the narrative while American service members bled out on that godforsaken island. But there was another option. One that had been war-gamed in classified briefings, one that existed in contingency folders marked with the highest security classifications. If Iran had set a trap, if they had deliberately created a hostage crisis using American Marines as bait, then the response couldn't be tentative, it couldn't be measured, it had to be overwhelming, instantaneous, and absolutely devastating. The kind of response that would end the crisis before it could metastasize into a protracted negotiation or a propaganda victory for Tehran. 38 minutes. That's how long elapsed from the moment the distress call came through until the order was given. 38 minutes of furious calculation, of secure communications between battlefield commanders and civilian leadership, of satellites repositioning and targeting computers receiving encrypted data streams. 38 minutes during which those 12 Marines held their ground, rationing ammunition, calling in their positions with clinical precision, maintaining fire discipline that would have made their instructors weep with pride. The authorization came with 3 words that would echo through military history: weapons-free, total engagement. Every naval asset within strike range received the same orders simultaneously. The Iranian Navy, such as it was, a collection of fast attack boats, corvettes, submarines of questionable operational status, and shore installations bristling with missiles, became priority targets. Not just the units near Abu Musa, not just the vessels that posed immediate threat, but the entire operational capability. Everything. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower's Combat Information Center became the nerve center of orchestrated devastation. FA-18 Super Hornets launched in pairs, their engines screaming defiance into the pre-dawn darkness. Destroyers lit up the night with vertical launch systems sending Tomahawk cruise missiles arcing toward predetermined coordinates. Submarines that had been lurking in deep water fired their own volleys, torpedoes racing toward surface targets that had no idea death was approaching at 45 knots. Electronic warfare platforms jammed every Iranian frequency, blinding their radars, severing their communications, ensuring that whatever happened next would happen in isolation, each unit dying alone without warning or coordination. The Iranian Navy had been built on asymmetric warfare doctrine, swarms of fast attack boats carrying anti-ship missiles, submarines that could lurk in shallow waters where American sonar struggled, shore-based launchers that could be moved and hidden. It was designed to be a guerrilla navy, one that couldn't win a conventional engagement, but could make the Persian Gulf too expensive, too dangerous for any foreign power to operate with impunity. That doctrine assumed time to react, assumed dispersal, assumed the enemy would be cautious about escalation. Those assumptions died in the first 90 seconds. The Tomahawks arrived first, their guidance systems so precise that they didn't just hit their targets, they performed surgery. Anti-ship missile batteries along the coast vanished in thunderclaps of high explosive. Radar installations that tracked American movements for years simply ceased to exist, replaced by craters and twisted metal. The Iranian corvette operating nearest Abu Musa detected incoming missiles exactly 4 seconds before impact, barely enough time for a sailor to scream a warning before the ship broke apart, its magazine detonating in a secondary explosion that sent debris raining into water that suddenly burned with spilled fuel. The fast attack boats, Iran's celebrated swarm tactics, fared no better. They had been designed for speed and surprise, but American surveillance had cataloged every vessel, every patrol pattern, every hiding spot along the rocky coastline. FA-18s came in low and fast, their targeting pods painting boats with invisible lasers, while munitions dropped with mathematical precision. One after another, the attack boats exploded or capsized or simply disintegrated, their crews given no opportunity to fight back, barely time to understand what was happening. Those that attempted to scatter found themselves pursued by helicopters with Hellfire missiles, hunted across waters they considered their own. The submarine threat required different tactics. American attack submarines had been shadowing Iranian subs for weeks, maintaining contact with passive sonar, waiting. When the order came, they struck with the cold efficiency of apex predators. Torpedoes crossed the distance in minutes, their guidance systems immune to countermeasures that the Iranians didn't have time to deploy. One submarine attempted an emergency surface, perhaps hoping to surrender, perhaps simply trying to save its crew. It broke through the surface at a steep angle just as a torpedo struck its tail, the impact breaking the vessel's back, sending it to the bottom in 2 pieces. Shore installations that had taken years to build, fortifications embedded in rock and reinforced concrete, were systematically obliterated. Cruise missiles penetrated bunkers that were supposed to be hardened against attack, their shaped charges designed specifically to defeat the kind of protection Iran had invested in. Naval bases became infernos, fuel depots exploded in fireballs visible from space, ammunition storage facilities detonated in chain reactions that shook the earth. The Iranian Navy's infrastructure didn't just sustain damage, it ceased to function as a coherent entity. Communication intercepts captured the chaos on Iranian frequencies, frantic voices calling for orders that would never come, reporting attacks from directions that made no tactical sense because they were being hit from everywhere simultaneously, pleading for air support that couldn't launch because the airfields were cratered and burning. Some units never even knew they were under attack, simply vanishing from Iranian tracking systems, their fate evident only by debris fields and oil slicks discovered later. The scale of destruction was biblical in its totality, a demonstration of what modern naval warfare looked like when one side possessed complete information dominance and the other was operating blind. Iranian commanders who had spent careers studying American capabilities, who had wargamed scenarios and developed contingencies, found every assumption shattered.
The Americans weren't supposed to escalate like this. They were supposed to be cautious, worried about international opinion, constrained by rules of engagement that favored restraint. Instead, they had chosen annihilation.
While the Iranian Navy died, the actual rescue operation proceeded almost as an afterthought. With Iranian defensive capabilities neutralized, extraction became straightforward. Marine Corps V-22 Ospreys approached Abu Musa from multiple directions, covered by attack helicopters that found no one left to shoot back. The 12 Marines, hearing the distinctive rotor wash of friendly aircraft, emerged from positions they had defended with ammunition down to their last magazines. They were bloodied, exhausted, but alive, every single one of them. The Ospreys touched down for exactly 90 seconds, rotors never stopping, Marines scrambling aboard with the mechanical efficiency of men who had trained for this moment 1,000 times. As they lifted off, naval gunfire began pounding Iranian positions on the island itself, 5-inch shells turning bunkers into rubble, ensuring that anyone who had participated in the ambush understood the price of their actions. The Marines watched from the aircraft as the island erupted in explosions, as positions that had pinned them down simply ceased to exist. When the sun rose over the Persian Gulf that morning, the strategic balance had fundamentally shifted. Iran had attempted to create a crisis to trap American forces and force a negotiation from a position of strength. Instead, in 38 minutes, they had lost virtually their entire naval capability. Reconnaissance flights later that day confirmed the devastation. Every major surface combatant either sunk or damaged beyond repair. Submarine pens collapsed, coastal defenses reduced to scrap metal, naval infrastructure burning. Years of investment, billions in military hardware, an entire defensive strategy, all erased in the time it takes to watch a television drama. The political earthquake was immediate. Iranian leadership faced impossible questions from their own military, from the Revolutionary Guard commanders who had assured them that American restraint could be exploited, from allies who had believed Iranian assurances of naval superiority in their own waters. How had their trap resulted in total defeat? How had American intelligence known the location of assets that were supposed to be hidden or mobile? How could they claim victory when their navy no longer existed? International reactions split predictably along existing fault lines, but the strategic reality was undeniable. The Strait of Hormuz, the waterway Iran had threatened to close for decades, the choke point through which tankers carried oil that kept the global economy functioning, remained open. And the force that might have closed it was at the bottom of the Gulf, twisted wreckage inhabited by fish and slowly corroding in saltwater. Russia issued statements condemning American aggression while quietly reassessing their own assumptions about American willingness to escalate. China watched with intense interest, updating their own contingency plans for scenarios in the South China Sea. European allies expressed concern through diplomatic channels, while privately acknowledging that the alternative, a protracted hostage crisis, would have been far worse. Regional powers in the Gulf, many of whom had lived under the shadow of Iranian naval threats for years, began recalculating their security arrangements with a new understanding of what American protection actually meant when pushed to extremes. For the Marines who had been trapped on Abu Musa, the experience became legend, the kind of story told in hushed tones in officer clubs and training facilities. They had held an impossible position against overwhelming odds, knowing that surrender meant propaganda videos and years of captivity, that defeat meant abandoning everything their service stood for. They had trusted that help would come, that the machine would work, that they wouldn't be left behind. And in 38 minutes, that trust had been validated in the most absolute terms possible. Every one of them received commendations, though the citations remained classified, the details of what they had been doing on Abu Musa too sensitive for public consumption. They returned to their units as men who had stared down death and watched their nation respond with such overwhelming force that the enemy simply ceased to exist as a fighting entity. The message resonated far beyond the Persian Gulf. Any nation considering testing American resolve and protecting its personnel received an object lesson in escalation management, or rather, in the deliberate choice not to manage escalation at all, but to end a crisis with such overwhelming force that further escalation became impossible.
It was deterrence theory written in steel and fire, a demonstration that some lines, once crossed, trigger responses that cannot be negotiated or moderated. Military academies around the world would study the engagement for years, analyzing the decision-making process, the speed of execution, the coordination between multiple platforms operating across vast distances. The technical aspects alone were remarkable. The integration of satellite intelligence, the synchronization of cruise missiles launched from multiple platforms, the ability to strike dozens of targets simultaneously with precision that minimized collateral damage while maximizing military effect. But the human element remains central. 12 Marines were trapped, and the nation moved heaven and earth to bring them home. Not through negotiation, not through diplomatic pressure, but through the systematic destruction of everything that threatened them. It was a statement about values, about what happens when you trap American service members and assume the response will be measured and proportional. The Iranians had miscalculated catastrophically, mistaking strategic patience for weakness, assuming that concern about escalation would paralyze decision-making. Instead, they discovered that patience has limits, and beyond those limits lies something far more dangerous than caution. Abu Musa Island returned to its familiar role as a disputed piece of rock, but the waters around it would never be quite the same. The wrecks of Iranian vessels became navigation hazards, their positions marked on maritime charts as reminders of the night everything changed. Fishermen avoided certain areas where debris fields made their nets snag, where oil still occasionally bubbled to the surface from shattered hulls. Divers exploring the wrecks in later months found them already being reclaimed by the sea, coral beginning to grow on twisted metal, fish making homes in spaces that once housed weapon systems designed to threaten the world's shipping. And in Tehran, military planners faced the grim task of rebuilding a naval capability from almost nothing, knowing that the asymmetric advantage they had carefully cultivated for decades had been systematically dismantled in less time than it takes to commute to work. The trap was set perfectly, baited with precision, executed with tactical competence that suggested months of planning. Iranian intelligence had tracked American surveillance patterns, identified vulnerabilities, chosen the moment when conditions favored their forces. They had prepared positions, positioned reinforcements, blocked escape routes with the kind of attention to detail that military professionals recognize and respect. But the hunters had become the hunted, and the price of ambushing American Marines was measured in the total destruction of Iran's ability to threaten the seas it had claimed to control. In the cold calculus of military strategy, it became a case study in what happens when tactical success triggers strategic catastrophe, when winning a skirmish costs you the entire war. The Iranians had captured the attention of American forces for 38 minutes, and in those 38 minutes, they lost everything they had spent decades building. It was a trade that no rational actor would make, yet it happened, and the consequences would shape Middle Eastern naval dynamics for a generation. The Persian Gulf remained contested waters, but the balance of power had shifted so dramatically that contests became theoretical rather than practical, discussions of what might happen rather than preparations for what would happen. And somewhere in the depths, beneath waves that care nothing for human conflicts, the remains of the Iranian Navy rested as monuments to the oldest military truth. Some fights you cannot afford to start, no matter how favorable the opening conditions appear.